Hello friends, my name is Deb Green and I am so glad that you are here. Each week I share techniques to grow your confidence and hopefully fall in love with watercolor. This week we are taking the mystery out of your watercolor tube label. If you have looked closely, you've probably seen words like pigment code, series number, light fastness rating, opacity, staining, and permanence. While not every label contains all of them, you can find the information on the manufacturer's website if you're interested. I have included a free cheat sheet with all of the information for you to download and print as a reference. There's a link in the description box below, so don't worry about taking notes. Just enjoy the video. Don't worry, it's not as complicated as it looks. So hopefully by the end of this video, you will know the different properties and be able to make a better choice for your watercolor palette. And while I'm thinking about it, if you could please be so kind as to click the subscribe and like buttons, because it is the easiest way to help me grow my channel so I can continue to put out content each week. And if you do, I appreciate it so much. Thank you. So if you want to take the mystery out of your tube of watercolor paint, come on, let's get into it. We are decoding the secret language of watercolor paint labels, which is made a little bit more difficult when the labels don't look exactly the same. They're not even always using the same codes, but while it can be a little bit confusing, it's not difficult to wrap your head around. I'm sorry for this hands video, but with these teeny tiny labels, I couldn't think of a better way to do it. I do have some visuals that will help me hopefully get my point across in a clear and concise way so that you understand all of this information a little bit better by the end of the video. The first thing I want to break down is pigment numbers. They are the real star of the show here. They are telling you exactly what colors are used like a recipe in each tube of paint. The names might be the same name by brand, but not necessarily the same pigments, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So here's a breakdown of the variety of pigments that are used in watercolor and other paints as well. The P always means pigment, the W white, so pigment white, pigment yellow, and so forth. Now down here we get into an extra letter, and this is pigment brown and pigment black. So pretty easy to see the correlation between these letters and the actual name of the pigment. And then each pigment has a pigment number. So pigment white 4 as in zinc white, and pigment white 6 as in titanium white, and so forth. I gave several examples going down the list here. I just realized that I forgot to write what this color is right here. So if you know, leave it in the comments. But I'm going to be honest, I do not memorize what these pigment codes are. And I think over time you'll start to get to know a few of them just because you will have looked at them. But my goal is not to spend the brain power memorizing these numbers. It is just to know what they mean so that when I'm comparing two tubes of paint, which these are obviously totally different tubes of paint, but if I'm comparing two Prussian blues, I want to make sure they have the same pigments. And here's an example of that. Before I forget, I got this graphic from watercoloraffair.com, so be sure to check out that website if you want more information about reading paint labels. But I just thought it was such a good graphic. And I'm sorry, since the online graphic was poor quality, it's a little bit fuzzy, but it gets the point across. So all three of these paint colors are called Hooker's Green. So we kind of assume it's going to be a mid-tone green color, but this one kind of fools us a little bit. The first one is by Daniel Smith. the second one M. Graham, and the third one is by Sennelier. When we're looking at these pigment codes, now we're thinking like a recipe, remember? This is pigment green 36, pigment Y3, pigment orange, which is kind of a surprise, isn't it? 48, pigment yellow 150. In M. Graham, it only has 2 pigments, pigment green 7, pigment yellow 110. And then when we compare the Sennelier, this one has 2 pigments as well, but they're completely different, PY 183 and PG 36. So 3 Hooker's green colors, completely different recipes. You are not going to get the same color when you have such differing pigments. So if you're at the paint store and you want to replace a color that you already have, you need to check the makeup of that color and make sure it has the same pigments. And if there's a difference, you're going to see a difference once it is painted out on the paper. So the next thing I want to talk about is series. Usually series will be printed on the label, but quite often it's also on a sign at the art supply store because the series determines the cost that you will pay for each tube of paint. And you've probably seen this before and not understood why there's a difference. So a series 1 paint has more inexpensive pigments, whereas a series 3 paint has more expensive pigments, and a series 4 or 5 is even more expensive than this. Basically, you just have to remember that the series number relates to how expensive the pigments are. Inexpensive pigments have a low series number, 1 or 2. Expensive pigments have a higher series number, like 4 or 5. So if you were ever wondering why cobalt blue costs more than ultramarine, that's why. It's all about the pigment's rarity, not how fancy the paint tube looks or how expensive the brand tends to be. That higher series number is going to be the same across brands. Next, we need to talk about the symbol that represents the transparency or the opacity of each color. Now, this can get a little bit tricky because it's not always on the tube of paint. Sometimes you need to go on the company's website, Daniel Smith is one of them, and find out what the transparency rating is. So some brands use a square and Daniel Smith uses a circle. Some brands use 4 different aspects while other brands use 3, but they're saying similar things. So if you see an empty symbol like this, it is transparent. It's going to be a see-through, very sheer color, something that would be perhaps used for glazing and building that color in layers. The next symbol is just one line across, and it is semi-transparent, which means it's just a little cloudier than transparent. Daniel Smith, you notice, doesn't have that symbol, and that's okay. You just get the idea of what that means. Semi-opaque is easy to recognize, whether it's a square or a circle here. That means it's even cloudier than the semi-transparent. You can still see through it. It's just a little bit less see-through than the first 2. And the last one is opaque, and that means not see-through. A famously opaque color is Indian red, which with a little bit of water is very opaque. You cannot see through it at all. If you add a little bit more water, it becomes semi-opaque. And if you add quite a bit of water, it will dilute down to a semi-transparent color. But in general, it is an opaque color. It's very dense. It doesn't really matter what the shape of the symbol is, or if it gradually increases in 4 steps or 3 steps. Just as long as you get the gist of what's going on with those, it will help you in the long run to understand how your paints are going to lay down. Next, we need to talk about staining. Staining is usually denoted in a 1 for low staining, all the way up to a 4 for a high staining color, which is the scale that Daniel Smith uses, and I will show you that in a minute. It can also be denoted as an S for staining, NS for non-staining, LS for light staining, and HS for highly staining. But I don't own any tubes of paint that use those codes. And I'm sure in your experimentations, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you can just brush that color on and it just will not come up. By other times, a color comes up quite easily. That is the staining property of that color. Knowing whether or not a paint stains will help you control your washes, fix your mistakes, and understands how your colors will layer on top of each other. Daniel Smith provides the staining code for each, but not every manufacturer does. So that's one of the reasons we really need to swatch our colors. And if you have not watched my video on both why we should always swatch our colors and creative ways to swatch that aren't just circles on the page, I will link both of those videos in the description box below, so be sure you don't miss those videos. They're very helpful. The fifth code I'd like to talk to you about is lightfastness, which is whether or not your paint has a tendency to fade over time. So this is really important, especially if you plan to make paintings to sell or give as gifts. You'll want to choose colors that have an excellent or very good light fastness so they don't start to fade almost immediately like the colors that have very poor light fastness. So there's generally 3 different rating scales that are used to rate the light fastness of pigments. First is this 5-star method, although I have seen some companies like Holbein use 3-star method, so be aware of that. Just get to know your favorite brands and how they rate the light fastness. The second way is the ASTM rating, which is the American Society of Testing Materials standards. And the third one is the blue wool method, which is exactly what it sounds like. They take wool, dye it blue, and lay it out in the sun or extreme light source and see how long it takes to fade. In order to compare, I want to start down here in the excellent category. I have not noticed any companies that I use that use the blue wool method, but it is interesting. Mostly I see the ASTM and the star method, and I want you to notice that they are inverse, really. The lowest number here is the best and the highest number here is the best, but it's pretty easy to figure out. When someone says it's a Roman numeral 1, it is first and highest. 5-star rating, we always want to eat at a 5-star restaurant, right? So that's easy to remember. And if you see these on a tube of paint, it has excellent light fastness, which means it will not fade over time. If we drop into the very good light fastness, we're going to see a Roman numeral 2 and less stars here. But these 2 categories are still considered desirable. If you're painting a piece to sell or to give away, you want to stay within this section of the chart here. Once we start dropping down into the fair, poor, and very poor category, we're going to see obvious fading in our artwork. Now, reds and pinks are notorious for poor light fastness, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because they have made improvements over the years. As we drop down in these star ratings, you might even read that a color is fugitive. This means not light fast, fades rapidly. It can fade even after days, weeks, and months very quickly. A famous fugitive color is opera pink. Another famous fugitive color is alizarin crimson, but manufacturers of alizarin crimson have started to use different pigments which have a better light fast rating, and now you'll start to see permanent alizarin crimson, which is not fugitive any longer. So understanding what fugitive means and why words like permanent are being added to colors helps you start to understand light fastness. Now, I watch several illustrators online, and they're not that concerned about light fastness because their artwork is going to be photographed and then digitally created. So it doesn't need to last. It just needs to look great at the moment that it's photographed. So there are applications for very poor light fastness. Not everybody really cares. You just need to know why it's important. The last thing I want to talk about is permanence. This is more of a big picture rating. Some brands like Winsor & Newton use their own permanence rating, which combines light fastness, chemical stability, and durability. It's basically the manufacturer's overall opinion of how well that paint will hold up long term. So if you see a AA, an A, that's great. If it says C, maybe don't use it for heirloom masterpieces. Just choose a different color with a higher rating. So there you have it. Now when you look at your watercolor tubes, you'll know exactly what's inside and how to use it to your advantage. If this video helped clear up some of the mystery, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps my channel grow. I can see on YouTube that many of you who watch regularly are not actually subscribed. So if you would please hit that subscribe button, that would be really helpful. I have plenty more coming your way. As always, thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I truly appreciate you. So until next time, I hope you take care and stay creative. Bye-bye.